Wind-worn hands gripped the oak handle, muscles coiling beneath a faded shirt as the giant cowboy raised his axe. The schoolhouse sat silent in the gathering dusk, a lone figure watching from the window. Miss Adelaide Parker had never seen such strength, nor such gentleness as when he stacked the split wood with careful precision. For 3 weeks, he'd come and gone like a shadow, never speaking more than necessary. Their worlds couldn't be more different. Her days filled with chalk dust and children's voices, his with open skies and cattle. Yet something in his storm-blue eyes reflected the same emptiness she felt each night in her empty quarters. What happens when two lonely souls find shelter in each other's company? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The stagecoach lurched to a halt, dust billowing around the weathered sign that read, Cottonwood Springs, Montana Territory, EST 1871. Adelaide Parker gathered her skirts and stepped down, one gloved hand clutching her teaching certificate in its leather portfolio. September 1885. A new beginning. This is it, ma'am, the driver said, dropping her trunk beside her. Town council meets at Hargrove's General Store. He tipped his hat before climbing back onto his perch. Adelaide stood alone as the stagecoach rumbled away. The street before her was nothing like the Boston she'd left behind. A handful of weathered buildings strung along a dusty main road, backed by vast rolling plains that stretched to distant mountains. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, making mockery of the town's name. No cottonwoods in sight, and precious little that looked like springs. You'd be the new schoolmarm then? She turned to find a gray-haired man in a string tie eyeing her with curious appraisal. Miss Adelaide Parker, she confirmed, extending her hand. I've come to assume the teaching position. Mayor Hargrove, he replied with a firm handshake. We've been awaiting your arrival. Come along, the councils gathered. He led her to a wooden building with Hargrove and Sons painted across its facade. Inside, for men seated around a potbelly stove rose as she entered. Gentlemen, Miss Parker has arrived, Mayor Hargrove announced. Introductions were made, Mr. Wilson the banker, Reverend Thompson, Dr. Burnett, and Mr. Sullivan who owned the livery. Their weathered faces shared the same expression, cautious hope mingled with skepticism. We've had 3 teachers in as many years, Mayor Hargrove explained as they walked later. Winters are harsh here, Miss Parker. Boston ladies don't always take to frontier life. I assure you, I'm not easily discouraged, Adelaide replied, though her confidence wavered as they approached a squat, gray building at the edge of town. The schoolhouse, Mayor Hargrove announced with forced enthusiasm. Built 10 years back. Needs some attention, but sound enough. Sound was generous. Inside, dust motes danced in shafts of light streaming through gaps in the roof. A dozen mismatched desks faced a scarred teacher's desk. The potbelly stove in the corner was rusted, with a meager stack of wood beside it. Winter comes early to the high country, the mayor said, following her gaze. That won't last a month, I'm afraid. We've had drought these past 2 summers, wood's not easy to come by. Adelaide nodded, mentally calculating the challenge ahead. I'll manage. Living quarters are through there, he continued, pointing to a door at the back. Simple but private. The small room contained a narrow bed, washstand, and writing desk. A single window looked out on the endless prairie. That evening, after the mayor left, Adelaide sat at the teacher's desk and opened her portfolio. The teaching certificate inside represented years of study, her escape from the path her parents had chosen, marriage to a man 3 decades her senior, a merger of Boston families more than a union of hearts. I'll make this work, she whispered to the empty room. The next morning, she rang the school bell at precisely 8 o'clock. 16 children of varying ages filed in, eyeing her with the same wariness as their parents had. By day's end, her voice was hoarse from lessons, her hands chalky, but she'd learned each name and glimpsed the potential in bright eyes. At the general store that Saturday, she overheard whispers as she selected supplies. Won't last till Christmas, mark my words. Eastern fineries won't keep her warm when the norther blows. Might need to ask Giant John about that woodpile. Who is Giant John? She asked the shopkeeper as he tallied her purchases. The store fell silent. The shopkeeper cleared his throat. John Blackwood. Keeps to himself, ranch at the north edge of town. Tallest man you ever did see, strong as an ox. Not much for talking. He's the one to split that oak cord for your stove, an old-timer added. No one else can manage it. Oak's like iron in these parts. That night, Adelaide shivered beneath her quilt. The air already carried autumn's bite, and her thoughts turned to the mysterious giant John and the unsplit wood that stood between her and a bitter Montana winter. She'd come west to find independence, purpose, her own path. Now she found herself dependent on the charity of strangers and the strength of a man she'd never met. The irony wasn't lost on her as she drifted to sleep, her teaching certificate propped on the nightstand like a talisman against failure. John Blackwood woke before dawn, as he had every day for the past 7 years. The small cabin creaked in the pre-morning chill as he lit the lamp and stoked the fire. His movements were efficient, practiced. A man who lived alone with no need for conversation or explanation. The worn leather ledger on his table contained yesterday's tally: 42 head of cattle, 3 calves born healthy, southwest pasture needing rotation. His large hand carefully inscribed the date and weather conditions. Clear. Frost. 2 words where others might write a paragraph. John stood 6'7" in his stockinged feet. His shoulders strained the seams of shirts made for ordinary men. People in Cottonwood Springs had taken to calling him Giant years ago, and he neither encouraged nor discouraged the name. It kept a comfortable distance between himself and the town, which suited him fine. He'd come to Montana with Rebecca and little Mary in '78, full of dreams for their ranch. 3 good years they'd had. Then the winter of '81 brought fever. By spring, he was alone, burying a wife and daughter in frozen ground. That was the last time the townspeople had seen him cry. The last time he'd attended church or joined in community gatherings. Some understood his grief. Others invented darker stories to explain his solitude. John ignored the whispers. Cattle didn't care about rumors, and the open range didn't ask for explanations. The ranch was smaller than he'd first envisioned, just enough to sustain one man who needed little. He kept to himself except for necessary business in town once a month. Sometimes, helping neighbors with tasks requiring his strength. A barn raising. A well dug. A fallen tree cleared. He would appear, work silently, and vanish again to his northern pastures. Outside, he greeted his horse with a gentle hand. "Morning, Chester." The animal nickered softly, the only conversation John needed most days. As he saddled up for morning rounds, he saw Mayor Hargrove's buggy approaching. Visitors were rare enough to be noteworthy. John waited, expressionless, as the mayor pulled up. "Morning, John," Hargrove called with forced heartiness. John nodded once. "Got ourselves a new schoolteacher. Boston lady. Proper education and all." The mayor fidgeted with his reins. "Thing is, council assigned her the old schoolhouse. Roof needs work before winter. Stove's decent, but she's only got that 1 cord of oak we cut last spring." John waited for the point. "Nobody can split that oak. Henderson tried, broke his axe handle. It's been drying all summer, hard as stone." Hargrove cleared his throat. "School's got 30 children this year. Can't have them freezing come November." "You want me to split the wood," John said, his deep voice rough from disuse. "And maybe check that roof. We'd pay fair wages." John considered. He had no interest in town affairs or school teachers from Boston. But children shouldn't suffer cold. "I'll look at it," he said finally. "After school hours." Relief flooded the mayor's face. "Much obliged, John. Teacher's name is Miss Parker. Adelaide Parker. I'll tell her to expect you." After the mayor left, John pulled his ledger back out. Beneath the day's entry he added, "School wood." The obligation now recorded, he returned to his routine. That afternoon he rode to town, timing his arrival for after the school bell's final ring. Children streamed from the building as he approached, several stopping to stare up at him with undisguised curiosity. He waited until they dispersed before dismounting. The schoolhouse was worse than he'd expected. The roof wouldn't last the first heavy snow. The woodpile was pitiful, mostly pine that would burn too fast in the hungry stove. The oak cord was stacked against the back wall, each piece needing splitting into usable size. Through the window, he glimpsed movement, the teacher still inside. He hesitated, then led Chester around back. Better to start with the wood and avoid unnecessary conversation. He removed his coat, tested the weight of his axe, and selected the first piece. The oak was indeed dense, its grain twisted and stubborn. John set it on the chopping block, measured his swing, and brought the axe down with controlled force. The wood split cleanly in two. As he reached for the next piece, he felt eyes on him. Turning slightly, he caught a glimpse of a woman watching from the schoolhouse window. Chestnut hair, pale face, eyes curious rather than fearful. She disappeared when he looked up. John returned to his work. 30 minutes later, the first half-dozen pieces were neatly stacked by the back door. He'd return tomorrow to continue. Without looking at the window again, he mounted Chester and rode back to his silent ranch, where no eyes watched and no questions waited. Adelaide settled into a routine as October unfolded. Her lesson planner, once pristine in its leather binding, now contained detailed notes on each student's progress, strengths, and struggles. She divided her 16 pupils into 4 groups based on ability rather than age, a system that raised eyebrows among parents accustomed to traditional methods. "Miss Parker," 10-year-old Maria Diaz asked, staying after class one Tuesday, "could I move to the advanced reading group? I finished my book already." Adelaide smiled. Maria was bright, devouring books faster than she could supply them. "Of course. And perhaps you might help William with his letters? He's struggling but won't admit it." Maria nodded earnestly. In the corner, Tommy Sullivan lounged against the wall, supposedly cleaning erasers but actually avoiding going home. At 12, he was her most challenging student, quick-minded but rebellious, testing boundaries daily. "Tommy, that dust goes outside, not on my clean floor," Adelaide called. The boy grinned unrepentantly but complied, whistling as he went. After the children left, Adelaide found herself listening for the now familiar sound of hoofbeats. For 2 weeks, the giant cowboy, John Blackwood, she'd learned, had arrived after school to split wood and make repairs. Always after the children left, always departing before she could properly engage him in conversation. She tried. "Thank you for fixing the roof, Mr. Blackwood," she'd offered the previous Friday. He'd nodded, touched his hat, and turned back to his work. Today, she was determined to do better. She'd brewed coffee and set out 2 cups on her desk, visible from the window. The sound of chopping drew her attention to the back of the schoolhouse. Through the window, she watched his rhythmic movements, the careful positioning of each log, the controlled power of his swing, the methodical stacking of split pieces. There was something mesmerizing about his economy of motion, so different from the nervous energy of the townsmen who visited the school board meetings. Adelaide turned to her lesson planner, making notes for tomorrow's geography lesson. The world map she'd brought from Boston had captivated her students, most of whom had never ventured beyond the county line. A shadow fell across her desk. John Blackwood stood in the doorway, hat in hand. His height seemed even more imposing indoors, though he stooped slightly as if trying to minimize it. "Your roof's fixed," he said, voice deep but quiet. "Put new shingles on the north corner. Won't you have some coffee?" Adelaide gestured to the prepared cups. "It's getting colder out there." Surprise flickered across his weathered face. After a moment's hesitation, he stepped inside, movements careful as if afraid of breaking something. He perched awkwardly on the edge of a chair clearly too small for his frame. "Thank you," he said, accepting the cup. "The children have noticed your work," Adelaide said, filling the silence. "William asked if giants were real. Tommy insisted you could lift a horse with one hand." A ghost of a smile touched John's lips. "Exaggeration." "I don't know," Adelaide replied. "That oak looks impossibly dense. The mayor said others tried and failed to split it." John shrugged. "Just needs the right technique. Force isn't enough. Have to read the grain." It was the longest sentence she'd heard from him. "Progress. Will it be a harsh winter?" she asked. "Signs point that way. Squirrels gathering early. Thick fur. On the cattle." He paused. "Your stove needs cleaning. Chimney's half blocked." I noticed it smokes. I wasn't sure who to ask. I'll see to it tomorrow. They finished their coffee in silence that felt less awkward than Adelaide had expected. John Blackwood wasn't unfriendly, she decided. Just unaccustomed to conversation. As he rose to leave, she gathered her courage. Mr. Blackwood, the children are putting on a small harvest display Friday afternoon. Parents are invited. If you'd care to attend. His face closed instantly. Not good with gatherings. But thank you, ma'am. He was gone before she could respond, leaving behind the empty coffee cup and a faint scent of wood smoke and leather. That evening, making notes in her planner about Tommy's improving arithmetic and Maria's advanced reading, Adelaide added a marginal note. Mr. B, progress with roof. Spoke about winter signs. Refused harvest invitation, perhaps too public? Try again with smaller gesture. Outside her window, the stack of neatly split wood had grown. Not just functional, but arranged with care, the most seasoned pieces closest to the door for immediate use. A small kindness from a man the town considered intimidating. Adelaide found herself wondering what other depths lay beneath his silent exterior. November arrived with a vengeance. Adelaide woke to find frost patterns etched across her window and her breath visible in the pre-dawn darkness of her quarters. The temperature had plummeted overnight, turning the muddy schoolyard to iron-hard ridges that crunched beneath her boots as she hurried to light the stove before her students arrived. The chimney, cleaned by John's careful hands the previous week, drew perfectly now. Yet the brutal cold seemed to seep through the very walls despite his repairs. By afternoon, when the last child had been bundled into warm coats and sent home, Adelaide's fingers were stiff with cold. She huddled near the stove, a shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders, stubbornly grading arithmetic tests as the daylight faded. A sudden gust rattled the windows. Adelaide looked up, startled to see heavy snowflakes swirling in the gathering darkness. The first real snow of the season, earlier than she'd expected. She hadn't prepared for the walk to the general store, her weekly ritual for supplies and her only social interaction beyond her students. The back door opened with a blast of cold air. John Blackwood stomped snow from his boots, a canvas-wrapped bundle under one arm. He stopped short at the sight of her. Miss Parker, didn't expect you still here. The cold makes the ink set faster, she replied with a smile, gesturing to the stack of papers. I thought I might finish before heading to Hargrove's. John frowned. Storm's coming in fast. 6 inches already on the north side. As if confirming his words, the wind howled against the schoolhouse, a mournful sound that sent a shiver down Adelaide's spine. I've brought extra wood, he said, moving toward the stove. Forecast looked bad. He unwrapped the bundle, revealing not just split oak but also a knotted piece nearly as thick as Adelaide's waist. Been saving this piece, he explained, setting it carefully beside the stove. Old growth. Heart of the tree. Burns longer than regular wood. Adelaide watched as he arranged the fire, his large hands surprisingly delicate in their movements. The flames leapt higher, throwing golden light across his concentrated face. Town's talking about you, she said suddenly. His shoulders stiffened almost imperceptibly. They say no man in the county could split that oak cord. That you're the only one strong enough. Town talks too much, he muttered, but there was no real anger in his tone. They also say you keep to yourself because of some great tragedy. Adelaide hesitated. I'm sorry if that's presumptuous. John remained silent, arranging the wood with methodical precision. I understand solitude, she continued softly. I've found you can be terribly lonely even in a room full of people. He straightened then, his height emphasized in the small schoolroom. For a moment, he seemed about to speak, then turned toward a student desk that had been wobbly for days. Without comment, he knelt beside it, examining the loose joint. There's a crack here, he said finally. Need to glue it properly, but this will hold for now. From his pocket, he produced a small wooden wedge and mallet, tapping it carefully into place beneath the desk leg. Adelaide watched his hands, capable and strong, yet so gentle with the fragile furniture. The same hands that swung an axe with enough force to split oak that defeated other men. You make it look so easy, she said. What's that? Fixing things. Splitting impossible wood. He shrugged. Just practice. The knotted piece of oak caught her eye, its whorled pattern reminiscent of the twisted thoughts that kept her awake at night. Thoughts of the life she'd left behind, the uncertain future ahead, the empty quarters that greeted her each evening. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, the words escaping before she could reconsider, "if you can split oak, can you split my loneliness?" The question hung in the air between them. John froze, his eyes meeting hers with an expression of such startled vulnerability that Adelaide immediately regretted her impulsiveness. "I'm sorry," she stammered. "That was terribly inappropriate. Please forgive." "I should go," he interrupted, rising to his feet. His face had shuttered closed again, unreadable. "Storm's getting worse." He was at the door in 3 long strides, pausing only to add, "Stay here tonight. Too dangerous to walk to town. There's enough wood to last till morning." Then he was gone, the door closing firmly behind him. Adelaide stared at the space he had occupied, mortification washing over her in hot waves. What had possessed her to speak so candidly? To reveal such personal feelings to a man who barely spoke 2 sentences together? Outside, the snow continued to fall, and the wind carried the fading sound of hoofbeats as John Blackwood rode away from her foolish question. 3 days passed with no sign of John Blackwood. Adelaide attempted to focus on her teaching, but her mind repeatedly returned to her impulsive question and his hasty departure. Each afternoon, she found herself glancing toward the window, hoping to see his tall figure approaching with an armload of wood. On the 4th day, as students filed out into the snow-covered yard, Tommy Sullivan lingered behind. "Miss Parker, is the giant man coming back to fix my desk? It still wobbles." Adelaide sighed. "His name is Mr. Blackwood, Tommy. And I'm not certain." Tommy nodded sagely. "Pa says he don't like people much. Says he got peculiar after his family died." "Your father shouldn't gossip," Adelaide admonished gently. "And neither should you. Now run along home before your mother worries." After Tommy left, Adelaide examined the desk in question. The wooden wedge John had placed had slipped out. She was attempting to reposition it when a shadow fell across the floor. "You're holding it wrong." She looked up to find John standing in the doorway, snow dusting his broad shoulders, a wooden toolbox in one hand. "Mr. Blackwood." She straightened quickly. "I wasn't sure you'd return. Said I'd fix the chimney." His tone was matter-of-fact, as if their last interaction had never happened. "And that desk needs proper repair." He set his toolbox down and knelt beside the desk, removing several tools and a small jar of glue. Adelaide watched as he worked, his large hands deftly manipulating the delicate joint. "I owe you an apology," she said finally. "My question was inappropriate and personal. I was overtired and—" "No need," he interrupted, focused on his work. "Winter makes folks melancholy sometimes." It wasn't quite forgiveness, but it was acceptance. Adelaide felt a tension ease within her. "Coffee's hot if you'd like some," she offered. He nodded without looking up. They settled into a quiet routine as afternoon faded into evening. John moved methodically around the classroom, addressing small repairs Adelaide hadn't even noticed needed attention: a loose floorboard, a sticking window, a cracked slate. She graded papers at her desk, occasionally rising to refill their coffee cups. "You're good with your hands," she observed as he reattached a hook for hanging coats. "Had to learn," he replied. "Ranch doesn't fix itself. Nor does a classroom. The children have noticed the improvements." She hesitated. "They're curious about you." Something that might have been a smile flickered across his face. "Children usually are. Tommy calls you the giant man." This time, the smile was unmistakable, brief but genuine. "Been called worse." Adelaide felt a small victory in drawing that smile from him. "Did you always want to be a rancher, Mr. Blackwood?" He considered the question longer than she expected. "My father built furniture. Thought I'd follow him. But Rebecca, my wife, she loved the idea of the West. Open skies. Land of our own." It was the most personal information he'd volunteered. Adelaide treaded carefully. "She must have been a remarkable woman." "She was." His hands stilled on the work for a moment. Fearless. Laughed easy. Never complained even when times were hard. And your daughter? Adelaide asked softly. Mary. The name emerged rough with emotion. 5 when he cleared his throat. She had her mother's laugh. Adelaide's heart ached for him. I'm so sorry, Mr. Blackwood. He nodded once, returning to his work. The silence between them felt different now, not awkward but respectful, acknowledging the pain that lay beneath his quiet exterior. As he packed his tools to leave, Adelaide gathered her courage. I never thanked you properly for all you've done for the school. For the children. Just repairs, he said with a shrug. It's more than that. You've made this place warm and safe for them. She held his gaze. Would you consider coming tomorrow? There's a desk at the back that needs a new writing surface. I'd be grateful for your expertise. John hesitated, then nodded. After school hours. I'll have coffee waiting, she promised. After he left, Adelaide sat alone in the classroom, staring at the newly repaired desk. A symbol of something broken being made whole again. John Blackwood had lost his family, retreated into solitude. Yet here he was, fixing things for children he didn't know, sharing small pieces of himself with her. She traced her finger along the edge of the repaired joint. Smooth now, secure. Small beginnings, perhaps. But beginnings nonetheless. The first major snowfall blanketed Cottonwood Springs in mid-November, transforming the drought-stricken landscape into a pristine white expanse. Adelaide woke to find diamond-like frost patterns etched across her window and drifts nearly to her doorstep. By the time she had cleared a path and stoked the schoolroom stove, her first students were arriving, cheeks red with cold and eyes bright with excitement. Miss Parker! Miss Parker! Maria called, bursting through the door. Mr. Blackwood cleared the whole road from town. He was up before sunrise with his big plow horse. Adelaide felt a warm surge of gratitude. Such thoughtfulness from a man who claimed to prefer solitude. School attendance was sparse that day, only the children from town made it through the snow. Adelaide combined her groups, leading them through mathematics in the morning and reading aloud from The Adventures of Tom Sawyer in the afternoon. As the early winter darkness descended, she sent them home with extra assignments for their absent classmates. She was banking the stove when a harsh, wet cough announced John's arrival. He stood in the doorway, snow melting on his shoulders, his face unusually pale beneath his weathered tan. You're ill, Adelaide said, concern replacing her greeting. Just a cough, he dismissed, but another spasm contradicted his words. Adelaide guided him to a chair near the stove. Sit. You're chilled through. For once, he didn't resist. She touched his forehead. Warm, too warm. You've a fever, Mr. Blackwood. How long have you been clearing snow? Since dawn, he admitted. Roads to outlying farms needed clearing. Children couldn't get through otherwise. Adelaide shook her head. You shouldn't have come here afterward. You should be home resting. Promise to finish the back shelf. His voice was rough. The shelf can wait. She filled the kettle and placed it on the stove. I'm making you tea with honey before you even think of leaving. While the water heated, Adelaide retrieved the scarf she'd been knitting in her evening hours, thick blue wool that matched the color of John's eyes. She'd intended it as a Christmas gift, but clearly he needed it now. Here, she said, wrapping it around his neck. This will help keep the chill away on your ride home. John looked startled, his large fingers touching the wool with something like wonder. You made this. For you, she confirmed, though I'd planned to give it to you later. He swallowed, visibly moved by the simple gift. No one's made me anything since. I know, she said softly. That's precisely why I did. The kettle whistled. Adelaide prepared the tea, adding a generous spoonful of honey. She watched as John cupped the mug in his hands, seeming to draw comfort from its warmth as much as its contents. When was the last time someone took care of you, Mr. Blackwood? She asked. His gaze remained fixed on the steaming mug. Been a while. Well, it appears I'm out of practice as well, Adelaide said lightly. It's been some time since anyone needed my care. He looked up then, studying her with unexpected intensity. No family back east? Parents, two married sisters. But was the odd one, more interested in books than bows. She smiled wryly. A disappointment to my mother, who had grand plans for my social debut. So you came west? Teach. To matter. Adelaide sat in the chair beside him. I've found purpose with my students, but evenings are quiet. John nodded, understanding in his eyes. Quiet can be deafening sometimes. The simple acknowledgement of her loneliness, so similar to his own, created a bridge between them. Drink your tea, she urged gently. Then I insist you go directly home to rest. He complied, finishing the tea before rising. Thank you. For the tea. And this. His hand touched the scarf. Will you be all right? Is there anything you need at your ranch? Been taking care of myself a long time, Miss Parker. But his tone held no rebuke, only a gentle reminder. Of course. But even the strongest among us occasionally need assistance. Adelaide walked him to the door. Promise me you'll rest. The look he gave her then was unguarded, his customary reserve softened by fever and unexpected kindness. I promise. As he mounted his horse, the blue scarf bright against his dark coat, Adelaide felt a shift in their fragile connection. She'd crossed some invisible boundary, offering care instead of merely conversation. And surprisingly, he had accepted. That night, as snow fell steadily outside her window, Adelaide added several rows to a second knitting project, a blanket in warm earth tones. She couldn't heal the grief that had driven John Blackwood into solitude, but she could offer small comforts. A scarf against the cold. Tea with honey. Moments of quiet companionship. Perhaps these small kindnesses were the first steps toward answering her impulsive question about splitting loneliness, not with the sudden force of an axe through wood, but with the patient, gentle weaving of connection, one strand at a time. Thanksgiving approached with a flurry of activity in the schoolhouse. Adelaide had the children practicing a pageant, complete with paper pilgrim hats and construction paper turkeys, to present for their parents. John continued his evening visits, his cough improving under Adelaide's watchful eye and regular cups of honeyed tea. Mr. Blackwood, Adelaide said one evening as he repaired a loose window frame, the children are performing their Thanksgiving pageant next Wednesday afternoon. The whole town will attend. John concentrated on fitting the wood precisely. They'll do fine. I was hoping you might attend, she ventured. Several students have speaking parts they've worked very hard on. His hand stilled. Don't usually go to town gatherings. I understand. Adelaide moved closer, watching his careful work. But the children have noticed your contributions to their school. Tommy asked if you might come. John looked genuinely surprised. Tommy Sullivan? Thought that boy didn't notice anything but mischief. Adelaide smiled. He's quite observant, actually. Yesterday he announced that the schoolhouse doesn't creak anymore because the giant fixed it proper. A ghost of a smile touched John's lips. Maria has written a speech about things she's thankful for, Adelaide continued. She's rather nervous about delivering it. Smart girl like that? She'll do fine, John said, returning to his work. Adelaide watched him secure the frame with practiced movements. The pageant begins at 2 o'clock. We'll have refreshments after. She paused. I'm making apple pies. She left the invitation open, moving back to her desk to check the children's rehearsal notes. The subject wasn't mentioned again that evening, and Adelaide didn't press further. Some boundaries couldn't be rushed. The day before the pageant, John arrived earlier than usual, a burlap sack in his hands. Got something, he said, almost hesitantly. For the children. Adelaide watched, curious, as he carefully emptied the contents onto her desk, 16 small wooden animals, each carved with remarkable detail. Bears, deer, rabbits, a fox, even a tiny mountain lion. John, she breathed, picking up a perfectly rendered owl. These are beautiful. He shrugged, but she could see he was pleased by her reaction. Thought they might like them. After their performance. When did you find time to make these? Evenings, he said simply. Keeps the hands busy. Adelaide was deeply touched. This solitary man had spent hours crafting gifts for children he barely knew. They'll treasure these, she assured him. especially knowing you made them. He nodded once. Might stop by. Tomorrow. If that's all right. Adelaide beamed. More than all right. The next day, the schoolhouse was transformed with paper chains and autumn decorations. Parents and townspeople filled the benches as Adelaide's students performed their carefully rehearsed pageant. She scanned the crowd repeatedly, but saw no sign of John Blackwood. Tommy stumbled through his lines about the first Thanksgiving. William overcame his shyness to recite a poem about harvest. Maria stood last, clutching a paper with her speech. I am thankful for many things, she began shakily. For my family, for books, for Miss Parker who teaches us new things every day. Adelaide smiled encouragingly as Maria paused, gathering courage. I am also thankful for Mr. Blackwood, who fixed our school and makes sure we are warm. Maria's voice grew stronger. My papa says Mr. Blackwood is a solitary man who keeps to himself, but I think he is a kind man who takes care of others in his own quiet way. A movement at the back of the room caught Adelaide's attention. John stood in the doorway, hat in hand, his tall frame unmistakable even in the shadows. Maria continued, sometimes the strongest people are also the gentlest, like Mr. Blackwood who can split the hardest oak but also carved tiny animals for each of us. She held up the wooden deer he had made. Thank you, Mr. Blackwood, for making our school warm and safe. When the applause came, Adelaide watched John's face. Emotion played across his features before he composed himself with visible effort. He remained at the back throughout the refreshments, nodding politely when parents approached to thank him for his work on the schoolhouse, but always returning to his position by the door. As the crowd thinned, Adelaide made her way to him, carrying a plate with a slice of apple pie. You came, she said softly. Maria's a good speaker, he replied, accepting the plate. Brave. Yes, she is. Adelaide noticed a turkey feather on the floor, dropped from one of the children's costumes. She picked it up, twirling it between her fingers. Would you stay? After everyone leaves? I'd appreciate the company. John glanced toward the dwindling crowd, then back to Adelaide. I could stay a while. Later, when the schoolhouse was quiet again, they sat together at her desk, sharing the last of the apple pie. The children were delighted with the animals, Adelaide said. Such thoughtful gifts. John nodded, carefully placing the turkey feather between pages of a book he'd been examining, Walden by Thoreau. Something to remember the day, he explained, catching her curious look. A good day? She asked. He considered this, then nodded. Best Thanksgiving in 5 years. The simple admission spoke volumes about his solitary existence and the significance of his presence today. One turkey feather, marking a return to the world of shared celebrations and simple joys. December arrived with bitter winds and frequent snow squalls. The schoolhouse remained warm and snug thanks to John's careful preparations. Extra wood stacked nearly to the ceiling, windows sealed against drafts, the stove cleaned to draw efficiently. Their evening routine had solidified. John would arrive after the children left, attend to any needed repairs, then join Adelaide for coffee and increasingly comfortable conversation. You're going to great lengths with these decorations, John observed one evening as Adelaide hung paper snowflakes from the ceiling. The classroom was slowly transforming with evergreen boughs, red ribbons, and candles for the upcoming Christmas celebration. The holidays should be magical for children, she replied, stretching to reach a high corner. John wordlessly took the snowflake from her hand and easily placed it where she'd been struggling to reach. Thank you. She smiled up at him, noticing how the candlelight softened his weathered features. Will you help me with the tree tomorrow? Mayor Hargrove is delivering a small pine. John's expression clouded slightly. Christmas trees weren't part of my upbringing. Pennsylvania Dutch family. Simple celebrations. Adelaide sensed the withdrawal in his tone. I didn't mean to presume. If it makes you uncomfortable. It's not that. John moved to the stove, adding another log though the fire was adequate. Haven't celebrated properly since before. Adelaide understood the unspoken reference to his family. The holidays can be difficult when they highlight what we've lost. He nodded, still facing the stove. Mary loved Christmas. Couldn't sleep Christmas Eve. Rebecca would. His voice faltered. She'd make cinnamon bread. The smell would fill the whole house. Adelaide approached slowly, standing beside him at the stove. I lost my younger brother Thomas when I was 16. Scarlet fever. For years afterward, I couldn't bear to sing the carols he loved. John glanced at her, surprise and recognition in his eyes. Does it get easier? Not easier, she said carefully. Different. The sharp pain dulls, but the empty space remains. I've found it helps to honor the memories rather than avoid them. He considered this, absently reaching into his pocket to withdraw a silver pocket watch. His thumb traced its engraved cover. Rebecca gave me this our first Christmas here. Saved for months. He hesitated, then clicked it open to reveal a small daguerreotype inside. A smiling woman with a little girl on her lap. Only picture I have of them. Adelaide's heart constricted at the precious memento and the trust John showed in sharing it. They're beautiful. Mary has your eyes. And her mother's spirit, he added softly. Fearless. Laughed at thunderstorms. A brave girl, Adelaide said. Like her father. John closed the watch carefully, but didn't return it to his pocket immediately. Sometimes I fear I'm forgetting them. Details get hazy. Tell me about them, Adelaide encouraged gently. If you'd like to. For a moment, she thought he would retreat back into silence. Then he began speaking, hesitantly at first, then with growing ease, about Rebecca's determination to make their ranch succeed, about Mary's fascination with wildflowers, about Christmas mornings and summer picnics and ordinary days made extraordinary by love. Adelaide listened, offering no platitudes, simply bearing witness to his memories. When he finally fell silent, the room had grown dark except for the stove's glow and a single candle on her desk. Thank you, she said softly, for sharing them with me. John nodded, looking somewhat surprised at himself. Haven't spoken of them aloud in years. Perhaps that's why the memories felt like they were fading, Adelaide suggested. Stories need to be told to stay alive. He considered this. You're wise for someone so young. 32 isn't so very young, she replied with a smile. Younger than my 45 years. He glanced at the Christmas decorations. I'll help with the tree. Mary would have approved. As he prepared to leave, Adelaide impulsively touched his arm. Join me for Christmas Eve supper? Nothing elaborate. Just simple food and perhaps some stories. The invitation clearly caught him off guard. Town gossip about their evening meetings had already grown. A holiday supper would only fuel speculation. Not concerned what folks might say, he asked. I'm concerned with what matters, Adelaide replied steadily. Friendship. Kindness. Two people not being alone on Christmas Eve. John studied her face for a long moment. What time should I arrive? 6 o'clock. And John? She rarely used his first name, and it felt significant now. Bring your memories. I'd like to hear more about your family. He nodded, a complex emotion in his eyes that Adelaide couldn't quite name. Grief mingled with something warmer, perhaps gratitude or even hope. After he left, Adelaide continued arranging decorations, humming softly. The schoolhouse was beginning to look festive, but more importantly, it was beginning to feel like a place where healing could happen. For her students, for John, and perhaps for herself as well. The small pine tree stood in the corner of the schoolroom, adorned with paper stars and chains the children had crafted. Adelaide had added candles in special holders, though she wouldn't light them until the Christmas pageant, a precaution John had firmly insisted upon, his concern for fire safety evident in his serious expression. It's beautiful all the same, Adelaide assured him as they stood back to admire their work. The children had gone home early, excited about the upcoming holiday performance and 2-week break from lessons. It's missing something, John said unexpectedly. Wait here. He disappeared outside, returning minutes later with a small bundle wrapped in his coat to protect it from the snow. Carefully, he unwrapped a perfect star whittled from pale wood, sanded smooth and polished to a soft glow. For the top, he explained almost shyly. Adelaide gasped softly. It's exquisite, John. Did you make this? He nodded, handing it to her. White pine. Takes detail well. The star featured delicate carved patterns, tiny snowflakes and swirling designs that must have required hours of patient work. Adelaide ran her fingers over the smooth surface, touched beyond words by the gift. "Would you place it?" she asked, offering it back. John reached up, his height perfect for the task, and settled the star atop the tree. It caught the late afternoon light, seeming to glow from within. "Now it's perfect," Adelaide said softly. In the days leading up to Christmas, the school buzzed with preparations for the pageant. John built a sturdy platform for the children to perform on, and helped hang extra lanterns to illuminate the evening event. Adelaide noticed how the students had grown comfortable with his presence, no longer staring wide-eyed at his height or whispering behind their hands. Tommy Sullivan even sought John's help with a stubborn piece of scenery, listening attentively to his patient instructions. The night of the pageant arrived with clear skies and crisp, cold air. Parents and townspeople crowded the schoolhouse, admiring the decorations and the carefully constructed stage. John stood at the back as usual, but this time Adelaide noted he was wearing a clean shirt she hadn't seen before, his hair neatly combed. The children performed beautifully. William, his shyness diminishing with each school event, recited a poem about winter stars. Maria played Mary in the nativity scene with solemn dignity. Even Tommy, cast as a reluctant shepherd, remembered his lines. Afterward, as families mingled and enjoyed cider and cookies, Adelaide noticed John slipping outside. She followed, finding him gazing up at the brilliant winter stars. "They did wonderfully," she said, pulling her shawl tighter against the cold. "Yes." John continued looking upward. "Makes me think of Mary's first pageant. She was an angel. Youngest one they had." Adelaide smiled at the image. "I'm sure she was perfect. Dropped her halo halfway through," he said, and to her delight, he chuckled at the memory. Rebecca nearly burst trying not to laugh. It was the first time Adelaide had heard him laugh, a deep, warm sound that transformed his face. She wished she could capture that moment, preserve it against the darkness that had defined so much of his recent years. "Thank you for helping with everything," she said. "The children adore you, you know." He looked skeptical. "They're just used to me now." "No, it's more than that. You listen to them. Most adults don't really listen to children." John considered this. "They say interesting things when you listen." The door opened behind them, spilling light and the sound of caroling onto the snowy schoolyard. Mayor Hargrove poked his head out. "Miss Parker, we're starting the singing. And John, Sullivan wants to thank you for that platform, holding up beautifully with all those stomping feet." After the mayor disappeared back inside, John turned to Adelaide. "Almost forgot. Have something for you." From inside his coat, he produced a small wooden box. "Not much, but—" Adelaide accepted it with trembling fingers. The box itself was a work of art, polished cherrywood with intricate carvings of wildflowers around its edges. When she opened it, a gentle melody played, "Silent Night," rendered in delicate chimes. "John," she whispered, "it's the most beautiful thing I've ever received. Made the mechanism myself," he explained. "Used to help my father with such things before you became a rancher," she finished for him. "You're an artist, John Blackwood." He shook his head. "Just good with my hands." "It's more than that." She held the music box carefully as if it might break. "You create beauty from raw materials. You see what could be, not just what is." Something shifted in his expression. A softening, a vulnerability. "Christmas Eve," he said quietly. "Still want me to come for supper?" "More than ever," Adelaide replied, her eyes holding his. For a brief moment, neither spoke. The caroling from inside provided a soundtrack to the unspoken emotions passing between them. Then John gently took her elbow. "You're getting cold. Should go back in." As they turned toward the schoolhouse, Adelaide knew that something fundamental had changed. The music box in her hands represented more than a Christmas gift. It was a piece of John's heart, offered tentatively after years of careful guarding. Christmas had passed with quiet joy, their evening supper intimate and warm, filled with stories and the simple pleasure of shared company. The week between Christmas and New Year's brought bitter cold but clear skies, allowing Adelaide to visit several students' homes, delivering small gifts and checking on families in outlying farms. New Year's Eve dawned bright, but by noon, the horizon darkened with ominous clouds. Adelaide had come to the schoolhouse to prepare lessons for the children's return, wanting to get ahead before classes resumed. The storm wasn't forecast to arrive until evening, according to Mayor Hargrove's morning assessment. The mayor had been wrong. By 3 o'clock, wind howled around the schoolhouse corners and snow fell in blinding sheets. Adelaide stared out the window with growing concern. The road to town had disappeared under white drifts, and darkness was falling unnaturally early under the storm clouds. "Should have left an hour ago," she murmured to herself, stoking the fire higher. The wood John had stacked now seemed like a lifeline. She calculated her options: attempt the half-mile walk to town in blizzard conditions, or remain safely by the fire and hope the storm passed quickly. A sudden pounding at the door startled her. She opened it to find John, snow-covered and grim-faced, leading his horse Chester. "John, what are you doing here?" "Checking on you," he said, stomping snow from his boots. "Saw the smoke from your chimney. You shouldn't be here, storm's turning dangerous." "I lost track of time," she admitted. "Is it safe to return to town?" John shook his head. "Visibility's near zero. Drifts already waist-high in places." He looked around the schoolroom. "You have supplies?" "Water." "Some," Adelaide said. "I brought lunch and there's always coffee." "Good." He removed his snow-crusted coat. "We wait it out then. I'll tend to Chester in your woodshed. He can't make it back to the ranch in this." While John settled his horse, Adelaide took stock of her provisions: half a loaf of bread, cheese, dried apples, and coffee. Enough for a modest meal. She set water to boil and arranged the food on her desk. When John returned, she had everything prepared. "Not exactly a New Year's feast," she apologized. "Better than trail rations," he assured her, accepting the steaming coffee cup she offered. As they ate, the storm intensified. Wind rattled the windows with growing ferocity, finding every crack and seam despite John's careful weatherproofing. The temperature dropped precipitously as darkness fell completely. "Might get colder before it gets better," John observed, adding wood to the stove. "Northern blizzard. Could last till morning." Adelaide nodded, trying to hide her concern. "At least we have light." She gestured to the oil lamp on her desk, its warm glow creating a small circle of comfort against the howling darkness outside. A particularly violent gust shook the building, and a sharp crack sounded from above. John was on his feet instantly. "Roof beam." He grabbed the lamp. "Stay by the stove." He moved quickly to the far corner of the schoolroom, holding the lamp high to illuminate the ceiling. Adelaide watched as he examined the wooden beams, his expression grave. "Snow weights too much for that old timber," he explained, returning to her side. "Need to brace it before it gives way." For the next hour, John worked methodically, constructing a support column from spare lumber he found in the woodshed. Adelaide helped as she could, holding the lamp and handing him tools. They worked in companionable focus, speaking little but anticipating each other's needs. When the temporary brace was secured, they returned to the stove's warmth. Outside, the storm showed no signs of abating. "You were an answer to an unspoken prayer," Adelaide said softly. "I don't like to think what might have happened had you not arrived." "Saw the chimney smoke," John repeated. "Knew you might be here." "You rode out in a blizzard on that hunch?" He met her eyes then. "Couldn't bear the thought of you alone in the storm." The simple admission hung in the air between them, more revealing than any flowery declaration might have been. "Tell me about Boston," John said suddenly. "What made you leave it behind?" Adelaide was surprised by the question, but welcomed the diversion from the storm's fury. As the night deepened, they exchanged stories by lamplight, Adelaide speaking of her restrictive upbringing and her desire for independence, John sharing tales of his early days on the ranch when hope still outweighed hardship. "I was engaged once," Adelaide confessed as midnight approached. "To a banker's son. A sensible match, my mother called it." "What happened?" "I discovered he viewed a wife as he did a fine watch, a status symbol to be displayed and then put away." She smiled ruefully. "I wanted more than to be someone's possession." John nodded, understanding in his eyes. Rebecca was like that. Had opinions. Dreams of her own. She sounds remarkable. She was. He stared into the fire. She would have liked you. As the old year died in storm winds, they fell silent, listening to the blizzard's fury gradually subside. Adelaide was acutely aware of John's presence beside her, solid, reassuring, no longer the remote figure who had first split wood for her months ago. "Happy New Year, John," she said softly as the mantel clock struck 12. "Happy New Year, Adelaide," he replied, her name on his lips sounding like a gift, the morning after the blizzard dawned clear and blindingly bright. John left at first light to check on his ranch, promising to return later to properly repair the compromised roof beam. Adelaide watched him ride away, Chester plowing determinedly through snow drifts, and felt a curious emptiness in his absence. School resumed the following Monday. Adelaide noticed whispers and sidelong glances from her students, especially the older ones. During arithmetic, she caught Tommy and William passing a note, which she promptly confiscated. "Miss Parker spent New Year's with the giant," she read silently, her cheeks warming. News traveled quickly in small towns, even during blizzards. That afternoon, Mayor Hargrove appeared at her door after the children had gone. "Miss Parker, might I have a word?" His usual jovial manner seemed strained. "Of course, Mayor. Is something wrong?" He settled heavily into a chair, looking uncomfortable. "There's been talk, Miss Parker, about you and John Blackwood." Adelaide kept her expression neutral. "Mr. Blackwood has been extremely helpful with repairs to the schoolhouse." Yes, and we appreciate his contributions." The mayor tugged at his collar. "It's just that, well, certain appearances must be maintained by our schoolteacher. Young minds are impressionable." "I'm not sure I understand your concern," Adelaide said carefully. "The New Year's incident. When Mr. Blackwood quite possibly saved my life during a dangerous blizzard?" The mayor sighed. "It's not just that. Your frequent associations have been noted. The school board feels." "The school board?" Adelaide interrupted. "Has there been a formal complaint?" "Not as such. But there are concerns about John's suitability as a friend to our schoolmistress." Adelaide felt her temper rising. Because he prefers solitude? Because he's skilled with his hands rather than his rhetoric? Because of his history, Mayor Hargrove said bluntly. "The incident after his family died. Surely you've heard." Adelaide faltered. "I know he suffered a terrible loss." "It was more than grief, Miss Parker. There was violence. He nearly killed Silas Jenkins in a fight at Sullivan's saloon." The mayor leaned forward. "Took 3 men to pull him off. Jenkins was laid up for weeks." Adelaide sat very still, absorbing this new information about the gentleman who carved delicate wooden animals for children. "That was years ago," she said finally. "Character doesn't change," the mayor replied. "We've accepted him back for commerce and necessary work, but intimate friendship with our schoolteacher is another matter entirely." After the mayor left, Adelaide sat alone in the gathering dusk. John had mentioned no violent incident. She'd seen no hint of such capacity in him, quite the opposite. His hands, capable of splitting oak, treated everything in her schoolroom with careful gentleness. She was still lost in thought when a soft knock announced John's arrival. He entered with tools and lumber for the roof repair, stopping short when he saw her troubled expression. "Something wrong?" Adelaide hesitated. "The mayor paid me a visit." John's face remained impassive, but she noticed his shoulders tense. "About the storm?" "Partly." She stood, gathering her courage. "He mentioned an incident with Silas Jenkins. After your family." Understanding and something like resignation crossed his features. "I see. He said there was violence. That you nearly killed a man." John set his tools down carefully. "Did he tell you Jenkins was drunk? That he spoke Rebecca and Mary's names with filth in his mouth, barely 3 months after I buried them?" Adelaide shook her head. "I lost control," John admitted, his voice low. "Not proud of it. Never raised my hand in anger before or since." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Not something I care to remember." He met her gaze directly. "Would it have mattered?" knowing that part of me exists? The question hung between them, heavy with implication. Before she could answer, he continued, "Town's right to be concerned. You've a reputation to protect. John should go. Get this beam fixed first." He turned toward his work, effectively ending the conversation. They worked in uncomfortable silence, John repairing the roof beam, Adelaide grading papers at her desk. The easy companionship of New Year's Eve seemed far away. As he prepared to leave, Adelaide found a folded paper that had been slipped beneath her door. Anonymous, written in a disguised hand. "Miss Parker? Asterisk for the sake of the children and your position, reconsider your association with John Blackwood. His violent nature may be dormant but not extinct. Ask yourself why a man chooses isolation. Not all wolves appear dangerous until they attack, asterisk. A concerned citizen." She crumpled the note, anger flaring at the cowardice of unsigned warnings, but doubt had taken root. John had admitted to a violent incident she'd never suspected him capable of. What else might she not know? "John," she called as he reached the door. "Wait." He turned, his expression guarded. "We need to talk about this," she said. "Properly. Not here with half your mind on roof beams and half on escape." A flicker of surprise crossed his face at her directness. "Tomorrow evening," she continued. "My quarters. 7 o'clock. I'll make supper and we'll speak honestly." He studied her for a long moment. "You sure that's wise? After the mayor's warning?" "I'm sure it's necessary," Adelaide replied firmly. "For both of us." After a pause that seemed to stretch endlessly, John nodded once. "Tomorrow then." When he was gone, Adelaide retrieved the crumpled note, smoothing it flat on her desk. The words seemed to mock her, casting shadows over everything she thought she knew about John Blackwood. Yet she couldn't reconcile them with the man who had carved a music box for her, who listened patiently to children's rambling stories, who had ridden through a blizzard because he couldn't bear the thought of her facing the storm alone. Adelaide spent the following day in a state of nervous anticipation. She prepared a simple supper, venison stew with root vegetables, fresh bread from the bakery, and an apple pie that had become John's favorite. As 7 o'clock approached, she changed into a blue dress she rarely wore for teaching, then chided herself for such vanity. At precisely 7, a knock sounded at her private entrance. John stood on the threshold, hat in hand, wearing a clean shirt and his best coat. He'd trimmed his beard and combed his hair neatly back. The effort touched her deeply. "Come in," she invited, stepping aside. John ducked beneath the doorframe, his large frame making her quarters seem suddenly smaller. His eyes took in the set table, the good china she'd unpacked for the occasion, the candles casting a warm glow over everything. "Smells good," he said, his deep voice betraying no nervousness, though she sensed tension in his posture. "I hope you're hungry." Adelaide gestured to the table. "Please sit." They ate with polite conversation about safe topics, the weather, school matters, his cattle. Only after the meal, when they moved to sit by the small hearth with coffee, did Adelaide broach the subject that lay between them. "Tell me about Silas Jenkins," she said quietly. John stared into his cup for a long moment. "It was the first winter after I lost them. February. I'd come to town for supplies, first time in weeks. Jenkins was drunk at Sullivan's. Started talking about Rebecca." His hands tightened around the cup. "Said things no man should say about another man's wife. When I told him to stop, he mentioned Mary. My little girl." His voice roughened. "Something broke in me. Don't remember much after that. They tell me it took Sullivan, Wilson, and the blacksmith to pull me off him." Adelaide watched his face, seeing not violence but profound pain. "I'm not proud of it," John continued. "Could have killed him with these hands. Would have, maybe, if they hadn't stopped me." He looked up, meeting her gaze directly. "That's the truth of it. Never raised my hand to anyone before. Haven't since. But I can't promise what I'd do if someone spoke of them that way again." His honesty was stark, without excuse or embellishment. "Thank you for telling me," Adelaide said softly. "You had a right to know." John set his cup down. "Understand if it changes things." "Changes what, exactly?" He gestured vaguely between them. "This. Whatever it is we've been building. Adelaide considered her words carefully. What happened was terrible. But grief can make us unrecognizable to ourselves. I don't believe that moment defines you, John. Relief flickered across his face, quickly replaced by uncertainty. The town thinks otherwise. The town doesn't know you as I do. Adelaide leaned forward, her eyes holding his. I've seen your gentleness with children, your care with fragile things. The patience in your hands. That tells me more about your character than one moment of blinding grief. John's expression softened. You see more good in me than I deserve. I see you, she replied simply. The air between them seemed to change, charged with unspoken feelings. John moved as if to reach for her hand, then hesitated. A sharp knock at the front door shattered the moment. Adelaide frowned. Who could that be at this hour? She opened the door to find a tall, elegantly dressed man on her doorstep, his city clothes and polished appearance starkly out of place in Cottonwood Springs. Adelaide Parker, he said, a brilliant smile lighting his handsome face. Found you at last. Adelaide stared in shock. James? James Harrington? The very same. He swept off his hat with a flourish. May I come in? It's frightfully cold out here. Before she could respond, he stepped inside, stopping short at the sight of John rising from his chair by the fire. For an instant, the two men assessed each other, James with arched eyebrows, John with careful neutrality. I'm interrupting, James said, making no move to leave. How fascinating. James, this is John Blackwood, Adelaide said, finding her voice. John, this is James Harrington. A friend from Boston. Merely a friend? James took her hand, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. You wound me, my dear. After I've traveled all this way. John's expression closed like a shutter. Should go. Getting late. He retrieved his hat, nodding politely to James. Mr. Harrington. Mr. Blackwood, James replied, his tone pleasant but dismissive. John, wait, Adelaide began, but he was already at the door. Thank you for supper, he said formally. Good evening, Miss Parker. The door closed behind him with quiet finality. Adelaide stared after him, her evening in ruins. Well, James said brightly, removing his expensive coat. What a charming little dwelling you have here. Quite rustic. He glanced around with barely concealed disdain. I've brought you something from civilization. From his pocket, he produced an elegant invitation card with gold embossing. The Continental Hotel in Helena is hosting a New Year's social. I've secured rooms for us both, separate, of course, for propriety. Adelaide barely heard him, her mind still on John's retreating figure and the wall that had visibly rebuilt itself in his eyes at James's arrival. Why are you here, James? She asked bluntly. His smile faltered slightly. Why, for you, of course. Boston isn't the same without you, Adelaide. I've come to bring you home. James Harrington settled into Cottonwood Springs with the self-assurance of a man accustomed to molding the world to his preferences. He took a room at the town's only boarding house, charmed Mrs. Wilkins the proprietress, and within days had ingratiated himself with Mayor Hargrove and the town council. Such potential in this little settlement, he declared over dinner at the mayor's house, to which Adelaide had been pointedly invited. With the right investments and guidance, Cottonwood Springs could become a proper frontier hub. Adelaide watched the town leaders nod appreciatively, seduced by James's confident pronouncements and Eastern connections. She'd forgotten how effortlessly he commanded attention, how his Harvard education and family name opened doors that remained firmly closed to others. And what brings you all the way from Boston, Mr. Harrington? Mrs. Thompson, the Reverend's wife, asked with poorly disguised curiosity. James smiled, his gaze finding Adelaide across the table. Let's just say I'm pursuing an investment of the heart. Heat crept up Adelaide's neck as all eyes turned to her. She hadn't seen John in the week since James's arrival. He no longer came to the schoolhouse in the evenings, though she noticed the woodpile remained mysteriously replenished and a loose window had been quietly fixed. The evening of the town social arrived with clear skies and bitter cold. James had organized the event at Sullivan's newly expanded saloon, which had been transformed with decorations imported from Helena. Every resident of Cottonwood Springs attended, drawn by curiosity about the sophisticated Easterner as much as by the promise of music and refreshments. Adelaide wore her best dress, forest green wool with modest lace trim. James met her at the door, resplendent in a tailored suit that must have cost more than her yearly salary. "You look lovely," he said, tucking her hand into the crook of his arm. "Though I've ordered proper gowns for you from Helena. This frontier attire doesn't do you justice." "I haven't agreed to accept such gifts," Adelaide reminded him, bristling at his presumption. James merely smiled. "You will, once you've remembered the comforts of civilization." Inside, the saloon buzzed with conversation and music from a hastily assembled band. Adelaide scanned the crowd automatically, though she knew John wouldn't attend such a gathering even under normal circumstances. "Looking for your giant friend?" James asked, his tone light but his eyes shrewd. "I made inquiries about him. Quite the tragic figure, they tell me, and dangerous when provoked." "You shouldn't believe everything you hear," Adelaide replied coolly. "Come now, Adelaide. Surely you can't be serious about him?" James lowered his voice. "A man who lives like a hermit, with dirt under his fingernails and barely a proper sentence in his vocabulary? You deserve better." "You know nothing about him," she said, pulling her hand from his arm. "I know he's not the sort of man who can offer you the life you were raised for." James signaled for champagne, which he'd had specially delivered for the occasion. "We made sense together in Boston, Adelaide. We still do." Later, as James led her in a waltz, Adelaide caught sight of a tall figure through the window, John, standing in the shadows across the street, watching the festivities. Her step faltered. "He's out there, isn't he?" James asked, following her gaze. "Lurking about like some lovesick Heathcliff." Before she could respond, he whirled her away from the window, seamlessly continuing their dance. "I'll be direct, Adelaide," James said, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "I've come to take you back to Boston. My father's bank is expanding. I'm to head the Chicago office. I want you with me, as my wife." Adelaide stared at him, genuinely shocked. "James, I left Boston to escape exactly that kind of life. You left because your parents tried to arrange a match with old Warburton. This is different." His hand tightened on her waist. "Think of it, Adelaide. Libraries, museums, concerts. Meaningful work establishing schools for a growing city. All the things your bright mind craves." The offer was tempting in ways she hadn't expected. She had missed certain aspects of Eastern life, the intellectual stimulation, the cultural richness Boston offered. "I need time to think," she said finally. James smiled confidently. "Take all the time you need. I'll be here until you make the right choice." The next morning, Adelaide rose early and walked to the schoolhouse, needing the familiar sanctuary to clear her thoughts. She was surprised to find fresh tracks in the snow leading to the building. Inside, the stove had been lit, taking the bitter chill from the air. On her desk lay a note in John's distinctive, careful handwriting, "Heading to North Pasture for 2 days. Roof is secure for the winter." So formal, so distant from the man who had nearly taken her hand by the fire before James interrupted. Adelaide opened her desk drawer, reaching for her journal where she'd been recording her confused feelings over the past week. It wasn't in its usual place. She searched more thoroughly, finally finding it beneath a stack of grading. The ribbon marker had been moved. Someone had read her private thoughts, including her conflicted entries about John and James. A sound at the door made her turn. John stood there, his expression unreadable. "Came to check the north windows before the storm," he said. "Didn't expect you so early." Adelaide held up the journal. "Did you read this?" His silence was answer enough. "Those were private thoughts, John. Found it when returning books to your desk," he admitted. "Saw my name. Shouldn't have looked further. But you did." His eyes met hers directly. "Yes." Adelaide felt exposed, vulnerable. "Then you know I'm confused. That James's arrival has complicated things." "No more than that," John said quietly. "No, you're considering his offer. No, you miss the life he represents. It's not that simple." Seems clear enough. John's voice remained steady, but she saw the hurt beneath his controlled exterior. He can give you everything I can't. Education. Position. I don't care about those things, Adelaide protested. But you do, John countered gently. It's in your journal. The libraries you miss. Conversations about books and ideas. Music. He gestured to the humble schoolroom. Things lacking here. John. I'm leaving tomorrow, he interrupted. Taking cattle to Helena. We'll be gone a week or more. The abrupt announcement stunned her. Because of James? Because it needs doing, he replied, though they both knew it wasn't the whole truth. And when you return? John looked around the schoolroom one last time, his gaze lingering on the desk he'd repaired, the shelves he'd built, the wooden star still atop the small Christmas tree they hadn't yet taken down. That depends on what you decide, Adelaide. He turned to go, but she caught his arm. Don't leave like this. Not with so much unsaid. For a moment, something raw and honest flashed in his eyes. Then he gently removed her hand. Your Boston gentleman is waiting, he said. Best not keep him wondering. 2 weeks passed with no word from John. Adelaide threw herself into teaching, grateful for the distraction her students provided. James continued his campaign to win her back, bringing books from Helena, arranging musical evenings at the mayor's home, and speaking eloquently of the life they could build together in Chicago. I've secured passage east in 3 weeks, he informed her one evening as they walked from the schoolhouse to her boarding house. I hope you'll be traveling with me, Adelaide. You're very sure of yourself, she observed. James smiled confidently. I simply know what you need better than you do. This frontier experiment was understandable, a temporary rebellion against your parents' plans. But surely you've proven your independence by now. Adelaide stopped walking. Is that what you think this has been? An experiment? What else? He gestured around at the modest town. You were educated at Radcliffe, Adelaide. You're meant for greater things than teaching frontier children their letters. She was formulating a response when Mayor Hargrove hurried toward them, his expression concerned. Miss Parker, Mr. Harrington, we're calling an emergency town meeting. The spring melt hasn't come, and Cottonwood Creek is nearly dry. Ranchers are reporting their wells dropping. In February? Adelaide asked, alarmed. Dr. Burnett says it's the driest winter in 30 years. Without spring rain, we're facing serious trouble. The town hall was packed that evening. Farmers and ranchers stood along the walls, faces grim with worry. Adelaide scanned the crowd but saw no sign of John. Where's Blackwood? She overheard Wilson the banker ask. His north pasture has the deepest well in the county. Out helping the Pedersens move cattle to the eastern creek, someone replied. Been riding from ranch to ranch offering assistance. Adelaide felt a surge of mingled pride and concern. It was so like John to quietly help where needed, without fanfare or recognition. Mayor Hargrove called the meeting to order, outlining the situation: unseasonably warm temperatures, minimal snowpack in the mountains, and rapidly dwindling water supplies. As the discussion grew heated about water rights and priorities, James rose to speak. Friends, he began, his cultured voice immediately commanding attention. This situation, while concerning, presents an opportunity. With proper investment, we could construct an irrigation system from the northern watershed. My contacts in Chicago would be interested in financing such infrastructure, with appropriate returns, of course. The crowd murmured, some with interest, others with skepticism. And who would own this water? Came a voice from the back. John Blackwood stood in the doorway, trail dust on his clothes, his expression unyielding. The investors? James smiled thinly. Mr. Blackwood, how fortunate you could join us. Answer the question, John insisted. Who controls the water under your plan? Those who invest in its delivery, naturally, James replied. But access would be available to all, for reasonable fees. John's eyes narrowed. Water isn't something to profit from when people and cattle are dying of thirst. A charming but impractical sentiment, James said dismissively. Infrastructure requires capital, which requires return. Before the argument could escalate, shouts came from outside. Fire! Fire at the Peterson place. The meeting dissolved into chaos as men rushed for horses and equipment. Adelaide pushed through the crowd, reaching John as he mounted his horse. "How bad is it?" she asked, grabbing his arm. His eyes met hers for the first time in weeks. "Bad. Droughts turned everything to tinder. Winds high." He looked beyond her to where James stood on the town hall steps. "Your gentleman staying to help or keeping his hands clean?" "That's unfair," she began, but John was already turning his horse. "School's the safest building with its stone foundation," he called over his shoulder. "Get the children and elderly there if the fire spreads toward town." Adelaide watched him ride away, then turned resolutely to organize the town's women. By nightfall, the schoolhouse had been transformed into a refuge. Children slept on blankets while Adelaide and other women prepared food for the firefighters. Shortly before midnight, the first wounded began arriving, men with burns and smoke inhalation. Dr. Burnett directed their care, barking orders as he worked. "Where's John?" Adelaide asked as she helped bandage a ranch hand's burned arm. "Still out there," the man coughed. "Fire jumped the creek. He's leading the effort to save the southern farms." Dawn broke to reveal a landscape transformed. A pall of smoke hung over the valley, and exhausted men staggered back to town in groups. Adelaide worked tirelessly, providing food, water, and comfort. James had joined the bucket brigade in town, she'd heard, though he'd avoided the front lines of the fire. It was mid-morning when John finally appeared, leading a wagon with several injured men. His face was blackened with soot, his clothes singed in places. A bloody gash ran across his forearm. Adelaide rushed to help him with the wounded. "You're hurt." "Others worse," he replied hoarsely, lifting an unconscious man from the wagon. Inside the schoolhouse, she insisted on cleaning his wound while Dr. Burnett attended the critical cases. John sat silently, his exhaustion evident in every line of his body. "The Peterson farm?" she asked softly. "Gone. Managed to save the livestock and family." As she wrapped clean bandages around his arm, their eyes met. Something passed between them, an acknowledgement of the barriers that had arisen, yet also the undeniable connection that remained. From across the crowded schoolroom, James watched them, his expression calculating. When Adelaide finished with John's bandage, James approached, immaculate despite the morning's efforts. "Quite the hero, aren't you, Blackwood?" he said, his tone just shy of mocking. John rose to his full height, towering over the other man. "Just doing what needs doing." "Indeed." James turned to Adelaide. "I've been thinking, my dear. Perhaps we should postpone our departure. The town clearly needs all available help during this crisis." Before she could respond, a small voice called out, "Mr. Blackwood." Young William, the shy student, rushed toward them, holding something carefully in his cupped hands, a tiny seedling in a dirt clod, its leaves wilted but still green. "Saved it from the schoolyard garden," William explained. "Is it gonna die like everything else?" John knelt to the boy's level, gently examining the fragile plant. "Not if we care for it properly. Plants are stronger than they look." His eyes flicked briefly to Adelaide. "Sometimes the ones that survive drought put down the deepest roots." The moment was interrupted by Mayor Hargrove calling for attention. "Fire's contained for now, but we're not out of danger. The drought continues, and we've lost valuable resources. We'll need to work together in the days ahead." As the mayor organized teams for various recovery efforts, Adelaide found herself watching John, who listened intently while still cradling William's seedling. His quiet strength amidst crisis stood in stark contrast to James's polished words and careful distance from the worst dangers. The choice between them suddenly seemed to clarify like parting smoke. The drought worsened in the days following the fire. Wells ran dry, crops withered, and tension in Cottonwood Springs grew with each cloudless dawn. John worked tirelessly, helping ranchers dig deeper wells and organizing water rationing systems. James focused on town meetings, drafting proposals for water rights and investment opportunities that left many farmers uneasy. Adelaide continued teaching, though attendance dwindled as older children stayed home to help their families. Each morning, she and her remaining students tended William's rescued seedling, rationing precious drops of water to keep it alive. "Miss Parker," Maria asked one afternoon as they carefully moistened the soil, "is Mr. Blackwood going to save our town from the drought?" Adelaide smiled gently. "No one person can bring the rain, Maria." "But he's helping everyone," the girl insisted. "Papa says without Mr. Blackwood's deep well, our cattle would be dead already." Adelaide had heard similar comments throughout town. John's northern pasture contained the deepest well in the county, and he'd opened it to all, creating a schedule for families to water livestock and fill barrels for household use. He asked nothing in return beyond cooperation and careful conservation. As she dismissed her students early, the schoolroom unbearably hot by mid-afternoon, Adelaide noticed James waiting outside, immaculate despite the dusty conditions. "I've been speaking with the school board," he announced without preamble. "They're quite concerned about the school's future given the worsening conditions. Several families are considering leaving the area." "People won't abandon their homes so easily," Adelaide replied, locking the schoolhouse door. "Some already have," James countered. "The Millers left for Oregon yesterday. The Thompsons are packing now." Adelaide frowned. She hadn't heard this news. "My offer stands," James continued. "Come with me to Chicago. This town may not survive another month of drought." Before she could respond, the sound of raised voices drew their attention to the center of town. A crowd had gathered outside Sullivan's saloon. Adelaide hurried toward the commotion, James following reluctantly. In the center of the group stood John and Mayor Hargrove, facing each other with obvious tension. John's shirt was stained with sweat and dirt from a day's hard labor, while the mayor looked relatively fresh in his town clothes. "Can't just declare private property communal," the mayor was saying. "There are principles of ownership that must be respected." "Water isn't like other property," John replied, his voice carrying across the crowd. "Not in times like these." Adelaide pushed forward. "What's happening?" Mrs. Wilson, the banker's wife, leaned closer. "The council wants to charge fees for water from Blackwood's well. Says it's to fund infrastructure improvements." "Whose idea was that?" Adelaide asked, though she already suspected. Mrs. Wilson nodded toward James, who stood at the edge of the crowd with a satisfied expression. John's voice rose above the murmurs. "That well serves 20 families' livestock. You start charging fees, half those families won't survive." "The fees would be reasonable," Mayor Hargrove insisted. "And necessary for proper management." "Proper management." John's tone held rare contempt. "The water flows freely. What needs managing is greed." Adelaide noticed James making his way to the mayor's side, whispering something in his ear. The mayor nodded and addressed John again. "There have also been concerns about your influence in town matters. You're not an elected official, Blackwood." "Never claimed to be," John replied evenly. James stepped forward, his cultured voice projecting easily. "The point, Mr. Blackwood, is that your unorthodox methods and questionable past make your leadership during this crisis inappropriate. The town council should manage resources, not a man known for violent outbursts." A ripple of unease moved through the crowd. Adelaide saw John's expression harden, though he remained controlled. "This isn't about leadership," John said quietly. "It's about survival. People before profit." "A convenient philosophy for a man with nothing to lose," James retorted. "Some of us have invested our lives and fortunes in building something meaningful. Progress requires proper management and, yes, profit." The crowd's mood shifted, dividing between those nodding at James's words and others muttering support for John's position. Adelaide watched John closely, seeing the weight of the confrontation in his rigid posture. "The well remains open to all," John stated firmly. "No fees. No restrictions beyond conservation." He turned to leave, clearly done with the argument. "This isn't finished, Blackwood," James called after him. "The council will vote on this matter tomorrow." John paused, then continued walking away. As he passed the edge of the crowd, Adelaide saw him flex his right hand repeatedly, a gesture she recognized from moments when he controlled strong emotion. Something in her snapped. She pushed through the crowd, hurrying after him. "John, wait." He stopped but didn't turn immediately. When he did, his expression was guarded. You shouldn't be seen following me, he said quietly. Not good for your position. I don't care about my position, Adelaide replied. What James said was unconscionable. John's gaze moved past her to where James stood watching them, his expression cold. He's fighting for what he wants. Can't fault a man for that. Even when what he wants would harm others? Especially then. John's eyes returned to hers. That's when character shows. Adelaide took a step closer. The school board is considering closing the school. James thinks I should return east with him. Something flickered in John's eyes, pain quickly masked. Maybe he's right. Drought's only going to get worse. Is that what you want? For me to leave? She challenged. Before he could answer, a commotion rose from the direction of the livery. A ranch hand came running, panic clear on his face. Fire! Fire at the Henderson place. Wind's driving it toward town. The crowd erupted into motion. John immediately took charge, directing men to gather equipment and organize teams. Adelaide turned to help coordinate the women and children, but not before she saw James hesitate, clearly torn between joining the emergency response and maintaining his dignified distance. As she herded children toward the schoolhouse, Adelaide glanced back to see John already mounting his horse, his face set with determination. She remembered his words from moments earlier. That's when character shows. The contrast between the two men had never been clearer. The Henderson fire proved even more devastating than the Peterson blaze. Driven by hot winds, flames raced across the drought-stricken landscape toward Cottonwood Springs. For 2 days, the town fought desperately to create fire breaks and save outlying structures. Adelaide worked tirelessly at the schoolhouse, which once again served as a refuge and medical station. She caught only glimpses of John, directing firefighters, leading a team to rescue trapped livestock, returning briefly for water before heading back to the fire line, his face grim with exhaustion and determination. James had surprised her by joining a bucket brigade, though he kept to the town perimeter rather than venturing to the front lines. When he visited the schoolhouse to check on her, his once immaculate clothes were smoke-stained and disheveled. "This is madness," he declared, accepting a cup of water. "The entire town could be lost. We should organize an evacuation to Helena while the road remains passable." "These people won't abandon their homes and livelihoods," Adelaide replied, bandaging a child's minor burn. "Then they're fools," James snapped, his cultured veneer cracking under stress. "There's nothing here worth dying for." Adelaide looked around at the community working together, women preparing food, children comforting each other, the wounded enduring pain stoically. "I see plenty worth fighting for." James studied her face. "You've changed, Adelaide. This place has changed you." "Perhaps it's simply revealed who I truly am," she replied quietly. On the 3rd day, with the town situation growing desperate, dark clouds finally appeared on the western horizon. Adelaide joined the crowd, watching anxiously as thunderheads built throughout the afternoon. "Do you think it will rain?" Maria asked, clutching Adelaide's hand. "We can hope," Adelaide answered, though she knew the wrong kind of storm, lightning without significant rainfall, could worsen their predicament. As dusk approached, the first distant rumble of thunder rolled across the valley. The air grew heavy with moisture and electric anticipation. Exhausted firefighters staggered back to town, faces lifted hopefully to the darkening sky. John arrived with the last group, supporting an injured rancher. After helping the man to Dr. Burnett's care, he stood apart from the crowd, watching the approaching storm with wary assessment. Adelaide made her way to his side. "Will it be enough?" "Depends where it hits," he replied, his voice hoarse from smoke. "Could save us or bring more lightning strikes." They stood in silence as the storm drew closer, the wind shifting to carry the scent of rain. When the first fat droplets hit the dusty street, a collective gasp rose from the townspeople. The rain began gently, then increased steadily until it fell in drenching sheets. Children ran into the downpour, faces upturned in joy. Men and women who had fought fire for days wept openly as the precious waters soaked their parched land. Adelaide felt tears mixing with raindrops on her cheeks. Beside her, John remained still, his expression one of weary gratitude. On impulse, she reached for his hand. His large fingers closed around hers without hesitation. "It's over," she whispered. John shook his head slightly. "Fire's over. Drought might not be. One storm won't save the season." Practical as always, yet he didn't release her hand. From across the street, James watched them, his expression hardening as he observed their clasped hands. He stood protected beneath the overhang of the general store, unwilling to subject himself to the drenching rain that everyone else welcomed so joyously. The deluge continued through the night. By morning, puddles stood in the streets and small rivulets had formed where dust had been. Adelaide opened the schoolhouse door to find a small jar on the step, carefully filled with rainwater. Inside floated a single wildflower, the first to emerge after months of drought. There was no note, but she knew who had left it. Classes resumed that day, though many children remained home helping assess fire damage. Adelaide kept the jar of rainwater on her desk, occasionally touching it like a talisman. As she dismissed her handful of students at noon, she found James waiting, impeccably dressed once more. "I'm leaving for Helena tomorrow," he announced without preamble. "The stagecoach office has reopened now that the roads are clear." Adelaide nodded, unsurprised. "I wish you safe travels." "That's all." His expression tightened. "After I came all this way? What did you expect, James? That you'd come to your senses?" His carefully maintained composure cracked. "Look at this place, Adelaide. One fire, one drought away from ruin. What kind of life is that compared to what I'm offering?" "A genuine one," she replied simply, "with people who face hardship together rather than escaping it." James studied her, realization dawning. "It's him, isn't it? The taciturn giant with dirt under his fingernails." Adelaide didn't deny it. John Blackwood has more integrity and compassion in his silence than most men manage with endless words. "He can't give you the life you deserve," James insisted. "Books, culture, intellectual stimulation. I don't need a man to give me those things," Adelaide interrupted. "I can acquire books. I can create culture here, with my students. What I can't create alone is the kind of steadfast heart John possesses." James's expression hardened. "You're making a grave mistake. When the next crisis comes, and you'll regret choosing sentiment over security." "Perhaps," Adelaide acknowledged. "But I'd regret choosing security over love far more deeply." The word hung between them. Love, spoken aloud for the first time. James recoiled slightly, then gathered his dignity. "I'll be on tomorrow's stage. Should you come to your senses before then, my offer remains open." He turned to leave, then paused. He was right about one thing, you know. Character does show in crisis. "I've seen yours, Adelaide Parker, and it's wasted in this backwater." After he left, Adelaide stood on the schoolhouse steps, gazing toward the northern hills where John's ranch lay. The landscape, so recently parched and fire-blackened, already showed hints of green where the rain had awakened dormant seeds. Like the wildflower in her jar of rainwater, hope had returned to Cottonwood Springs. Now she needed to discover if it had returned to John Blackwood's heart as well. The stage departed at noon the following day, James Harrington aboard with his expensive luggage and wounded pride. Adelaide stood at the schoolhouse window, watching it disappear in a cloud of dust, feeling neither regret nor triumph, only certainty in her decision to remain. She hadn't seen John since the night of the rainstorm. Word around town was that he'd gone to help the Hendersons salvage what they could from their burned-out farm. Adelaide understood his absence wasn't personal, yet she felt the distance acutely. A week passed. The land greened perceptibly, though Dr. Burnett cautioned that one rainstorm wouldn't end the drought entirely. Children returned to school, their lessons now including practical methods of water conservation and fire safety. Adelaide threw herself into teaching, expanding her curriculum to incorporate the hard-won wisdom of their recent trials. One evening as she prepared to lock up, Tommy Sullivan lingered behind, unusually serious. "Miss Parker, are you fixing to leave Cottonwood Springs too?" Adelaide looked up in surprise. "Of course not. Why would you think that?" Tommy scuffed his boot against the floor. "Pa says educated ladies don't stay in places like this when they got choices. Says Mr. Harrington offered you a fine life back east." Your father doesn't know everything, Adelaide replied gently. Some choices aren't about fine things or easy lives. Like Mr. Blackwood choosing to help everybody instead of just taking care of his own ranch? She smiled at the boy's perception. Exactly like that. Tommy nodded, satisfied. Good. 'Cause he's building something real nice at his place. Would be a shame if nobody got to see it. Adelaide's heart quickened. What do you mean? What's he building? But Tommy just grinned and darted out the door, calling over his shoulder, You'll see. The next morning, Adelaide woke to find a small wooden box on her doorstep, similar to the music box John had made her for Christmas, but simpler. Inside lay a folded note in John's careful handwriting. Asterisk if you're not otherwise engaged, I'd welcome your visit. North Pasture. Tate'd be, asterisk. The formal phrasing made her smile. So like John to be cautious, respectful even now. She saddled the mare she'd purchased with her teaching savings and rode north through greening hills. As she crested the final rise, John's ranch came into view below. A modest cabin with outbuildings, nestled against protective hills, a creek running nearby. And something new, a structure taking shape behind the cabin, its timber frame rising against the sky. John worked atop it, hammering roof beams into place. At her approach, he paused, shading his eyes against the morning sun. Adelaide dismounted, drinking in the sight of him, tall and solid against the sky, a man with the strength to split oak and the gentleness to nurture wildflowers in drought. You've been busy, she called up to him. John climbed down carefully, wiping his hands on his trousers before approaching. His eyes searched her face. Heard Harrington left, he said simply. Yes. Thought you might go with him. Adelaide shook her head. My place is here. Something shifted in John's expression, hope carefully contained. At the school? At the school, she agreed. And wherever else I might belong. His eyes held hers for a long moment. Then he gestured toward the structure behind him. Building a proper workshop. Always wanted to make furniture like my father did. Adelaide smiled. Tommy said you were building something special. Boy talks too much, John muttered, but without heat. He hesitated, then added, been thinking. School could use new desks. Proper ones, sized for different ages. The children would love that, Adelaide said softly. John nodded toward the cabin. Coffee's hot if you'd like some. They sat on the porch steps with steaming cups, looking out over land that showed signs of recovery after the rain. Neither spoke for a time, the silence comfortable between them. I read your journal, John said finally. Not just my name. The parts about missing libraries and music and such. Adelaide turned to him. John. Let me finish, he said gently. Been thinking about that. No reason Cottonwood Springs can't have those things too. Proper library. Music. Community that values learning. He gestured toward the workshop frame. Could build bookshelves for a start. Adelaide felt tears prick her eyes at the simple, profound understanding in his words. You wouldn't feel lessened by bringing those things here? John looked surprised. Why would I? Never objected to civilization. Just to treating people as less important than profit. He set his coffee cup aside, turning to face her directly. Adelaide, I can't offer what Harrington could. But I can offer a life built together, not just given to you ready-made. That's exactly what I want, she whispered. A life built with purpose. With meaning. She gathered her courage. With love. John's weathered face softened. His large hand reached tentatively for hers. Been alone a long time. Might not be very good at this. Adelaide laced her fingers through his. We'll learn together. A year later, the schoolhouse stood transformed. New desks, carefully crafted for various sizes of students, filled the main room. Bookshelves lined the walls, already half filled with volumes donated or purchased through community fundraising. The sign above the door, hand-carved in oak, read, Cottonwood Springs School, Adelaide and John Blackwood, proprietors. On a warm May evening, the schoolhouse hosted a different kind of gathering. Wildflowers decorated every surface, and the town filled the benches to witness two solitary souls pledged to build a life together. As dusk fell, John and Adelaide sat on the schoolhouse steps, his arm around her shoulders as she read aloud from Emerson, her voice carrying softly in the twilight. Behind them, the school that had first connected them now stood as a symbol of their shared vision. "If you can split oak," Adelaide murmured, looking up at her husband, "can you split my loneliness?" John's arm tightened around her. "No need," he replied softly. "It's already gone." In the gentle spring evening, they had their answer. Real strength lay not in the swing of an axe, but in the courage to heal another's emptiness by offering one's whole heart.